Okay, we're continuing on the verses in chapter 9. I have page 41, actually 42. Let's see. Yeah, middle of page 41 in my text. In the Chinese, we begin with the Ru Lai Fei, and then in the English, does not take marks as his substance, literal. So maybe we could read the, let's see. Yeah, we'll just read the first verse and then pick up. 如来非以相为体，但是无相具灭法，身相为一系诸诸，世间虽有皆得见。Those of you who are following online will see the Buddhist Text Translation Society of that, and I'll read that through, and then I'm going to take some liberty and try to edit it a bit, and then maybe go into some explanation. It says, the thus come one does not take marks as his substance, is characterized by markless still quiescence, yet he is fully complete with physical marks and awesome deportment. According to what they like, all in the world get to see him. So, I would edit this to read something like this, and then those of you who are following, interested in the translation, please jump in. I would change it to the thus come to a thus come one, as there's not just one, it's a title for a fully accomplished awakened being, Buddha, another name. So instead of the Buddha, a Buddha, instead of the thus come one, the substance here is really a literal dictionary translation. I think what it's getting at is it means one's fundamental essence or being. So there I would translate it as, thus come one's essence or being is not made up of, and I put sights and sounds. Now I'm going to actually translate marks, shang, which gets translated as marks or characteristics. It's a very technical term. But if you see, for example, in the Vajra Sutra, it's illustrated by two dimensions of how things appear through seeing and hearing. So in the Vajra Sutra, one of the key elements is the Bodhisattva does not dwell or set up in marks. And the four marks are sometimes listed as, they're called lakshanas, or false notions is really another way of rendering it. And they consist of four things. One is the illusion that there's a real self in the five skandhas. That's the mark of self. And then the second mark is that this self is a man or personality different from other beings. So that's a mark of others. And then the third one would be that all beings have a self born of the five skandhas. So that's the mark of self in living beings. That's the third mark. And then the fourth one, that this self has a determined or fated period of life. That's the mark of a lifespan. So it's taking the false notion of a self and running it through three dimensions. This self, apart from that self, other living beings, that all living beings have a different self, born of the five skandhas, and then this self has a time, it dwells and disappears, so it's caught up with conditioned existence. These are called the four marks. There's a self, that I'm different from other beings, that all living beings are produced by the skandhas, and life is limited to this span. In the Vajra Sutra, when the Buddha is discussing this in more concrete terms and not using Shang, he calls it, if you look for me in sights, and you listen with your ear to find me in sounds, you walk a crooked path and will never encounter, behold the thus come one. So there, I really like it because it's really saying sights and sounds. What we see and what we hear become these marks. In other words, as things appear to us and seem to come into our hearing faculty with a discrimination based on these four notions, false notions, just rendering as sights and sounds, I think, is legit. And I think it helps the reader understand what's going on. Because if you say marks, it's really not, unless you're really up on the technical terminology, but if you say the thus come one's essence, being, is not made up of sights and sounds, does not consist of sights and sounds. It's not how one identifies the thus come one, or the thus come one identifies through that. Then I change the next one, rather his being is a thing of markless purity and stillness. Or rather his being is a dharma of markless purity and stillness. Because you notice fa is in the Chinese, in the second line, which really isn't accounted for in the original one. It just says he is characterized by markless still quiescence, but actually characterized is not there, except if you take dharma to be a distinguishing phenomenological sort of category. So that's why I say, rather his being is a thing of markless purity and stillness. And I'm translating still quiescence as markless purity and stillness. And then the third line I would retranslate, and yet his physical appearance is magnificent. His bearing awe-inspiring. And so the text would say, and yet his physical appearance as he appears is, and by magnificent we mean exceptionally fine, strikingly fine, impressive. And I think that's better than, what is it, the first one? Fully complete physical marks. And his bearing, they say awesome deportment, but what deportment means, his bearing has an awe-inspiring quality about it. There's a magnificent glowing gravitas. And gravitas not mean somber and scary, but more centered and pure and of awesome character, impeccable character. And then finally the last one, all in the world see him in a way that brings him joy. Or, according to what brings him joy, all in the world delight in seeing him. But I like the first one. All in the world see him in a way that brings him joy. So two thoughts here. I'm working on this. A lot of time we take dharma, especially as we translate it, as abstract philosophical conceptualization. And then we say marks, as if marks were a thing. And instead of, I've done this before, sort of like enlightenment as a thing, as opposed to awakening as an activity. So I would then translate, I'm playing around with this, but I think it works, retranslate marks as marking, graffiti, if you will. And what you're doing is the activity of marking, of discriminating, of a false, illusory discernment, a separation of reality, which is, according to the teachings, like dream, illusion, bubble, shadow. That's the nature of conditioned dharmas. They have a single mark. That's another way it's rendered. And their mark is without distinction. They are of a piece, the Huineng says. They are of a piece. They're alike, fundamentally alike, like dreams, illusion, bubble, shadows. They have no substance to them whatsoever. They are conditioned things, conditioned phenomena that come into being as an interaction with our sense organs, the objects, and consciousness. So they are not, in a sense, permanent, lasting, substantial things, but merely conditioned dharmas. the activity of doing that is marking, rather than saying he is apart from marks. He doesn't mark. He isn't doing, or she isn't doing marking, isn't making this discriminatory setting up. So this is one way I would work with it. And I think in terms of cultivation, I call this more transformative therapeutic translation, equivalency, in that what's conveyed to you is he is apart from marks. Set something like one who is impervious to reality and what we take to be reality. He no longer is marking or doesn't mark. Reverses that energy to say, well, then what's going on with this cultivator? What's going on with this thus come one? Free from marking, no longer is dividing, discriminating, making all these divisions between me and mine and self and others and so on and so forth. That is considered to be freedom. Freedom from marking, freedom from appearances. But freedom from appearances only occurs if you stop marking. You can have freedom from appearances in some kind of abstract sense, even though you might know at some philosophical level that these are conditioned dharmas and they're not real. The liberation from that comes from fully appreciating that and embodying it in a way that you're no longer going out and marking up the world, no longer going out and making the 10,000 things. And that was part of Huineng Nung's enlightenment, how unexpected, he says, the 10,000 things are created from this nature, marking up. And when the marking stops, the 10,000 things return to a single unified field. So this is one way to deal with it. The other part I would do, if you see the character again on this verse, I'm looking over the last line, Shijian Sui Yao, Jie De Jian, literally translated according to what they like, all in the world get to see them. I don't like that translation because it really is very superficial. We talked about this earlier. A good teacher, a good way place, a good method of practice does not give you what you like. It sometimes kind of throws light on, I don't want to say takes away what you like, but makes what you like look pretty trivial. This is that marking phenomena that's being checked. And so most of our time is spent pursuing what we like and running away from what we don't like, which is the conditioned mind doing its chase, seek, drop, want, fear, get, da-da-da-da-da, on and on. So I think like here is way too weak. And it's misleading because, and I was going to go into this and there won't be time tonight, maybe next week, and tell a couple stories about teachers who give students what they like and where this ends up. And it doesn't end up in full awakening. So that's another sort of thing I can say for next week. But for now, I want to go back to something that Yao is used in a much more sublime and refined sense in Chinese philosophy and literature. And that's the word that's used here. I don't know what the Sanskrit original is. But I guess it would be something more like a rasa. And I'll explain why I think it's like that. But when I asked one of my colleagues who's really pretty learned in the literature of Chinese, she said that Yao is a joy or fullness that comes from arriving at a state of clarity. Yao is a delight, a pleasure, if you will, in a very deep sense of arriving at a state of clarity. It's a subliminal longing, and thus better translated as well-being. So all that get to see or hear the thus come one experience a fullness of well-being, a kind of an uplifting fullness. So It can function as a verb, which means to find deep, fulfilling pleasure in or deep well-being in, or it can be used as a noun, which means this sublime infusion. Interesting, I mentioned this before, when you put the grass radical with it, it becomes medicine. So this gives you an idea that this is not like so much as healing, wholesome, healthy. And that word with the grass radical, which are the herbs that do this, is called medicine. So you have to think of what this is saying. It's not like the Buddha's giving you what you like, but rather giving you a prescription of sights and sounds and inspirations that heal and make you whole in a very, very deep way. And once you have a taste from this, there's nothing else that'll satisfy that deep longing. That's why at lunch you'd say, I take my food as medicine. In the same way, dharma fulfills in that way. And so it's like a deep inner joy. It's not some sort of skin tickle hedonism that we're talking about here. Or, the promise of eat, drink, and be merry, and, and sit in meditation, and they all work together. That's not what's being talked about here. This, I say, is closest to my understanding, and again, it's not my expertise, but from what I understand, there's a term in Buddhism called vimutti rasa in the Pali. And vimutti means liberation, freedom, but liberation from the entanglements of afflictions, of outflows, liberation from suffering, really, at a deep level. Rasa is a flavor, and so, or the taste. And so, taste or flavor of liberation is vimutti rasa. And rasa then, I think, comes closer to the yao, or the joy, or the fullness here, the fullness of something. And rasa is used both in religious terms, but it's also used in the higher forms of dance and performance in the Indian tradition, and in theater as well. And what that meant is it's an elevated sense of fullness, of joy. It evokes an emotion of feeling in the audience or the reader that cannot be described. And yet, you're transported to another reality that's a bit above and more pure than the common one, full of wonder and joy and bliss. And where you experience the essence of your own consciousness unfolding into this fullness. That's what rasa means. And therefore, from this, you get insight. If the theater is done in this way, at the end of that play, at the end of that performance, you have new insights and reflections on your spiritual and moral qualities. That's what happens with rasa. It's not just a charge, it's not just a rush. It's actually a purification and a cleansing and a lifting up. Edifying, if you want to use that word. Anyway, so that's how I would work with this first one and maybe retranslate it. The second line of verse, and I won't read the Chinese, but just go on to the BTTS English, says the Buddha Dharma is subtle, wonderful, and difficult to measure. No words and speech are able to reach it. It is not combined, nor is it uncombined. In substance and nature, it is still and quiet without marks. Again, without marks again. Now we've gone to the thus come one as the first subject. Now we've gone to the Dharma itself, the teaching of the thus come one. And it says, the teaching, like the thus come one, is not able to be got at through words and language, concepts, intellectualizing. Now, got at doesn't mean that you can't approach it, that you can't point to it, that you can't indicate it with words and language. I mean, it'd be absurd. Otherwise, why do we have text? So obviously, there's a purpose for the teachings and the verbal oral transmission. But what it says is you can't fully comprehend And I would change this, the Buddha Dharma, subtle, wonderful, and difficult to fathom, rather than to measure. Liang is the character here, but fathom is better because fathom comes in English from the arm reaching out to embrace. So fathom means to fully wrap your arms around. And in this case, to wrap your mind around by extension. To get to the bottom of something, penetrate with the mind, to fully understand. This is fathom. So I think what it's saying here, fathom's better than the first choice, which is measure. Because you're not really measuring dharma. What you're trying to do is to fully embrace it, fully understand it. Then the second line I would put, no words and speech are able to reach it. I would just say simply, beyond the reach of words and speech. But again, if you look at the text, like the Avatamsaka, it says, words and speech are ultimately unable to fathom this, and they're therefore provisional or false. But we use the false to find the true. So again, I want to make sure we don't fall into this nihilistic thing here that you don't need words and language, that's not part of the path. It's an important part of the path. But it's not sufficient, even though it's necessary. Now this next line is really, really difficult. I found it difficult, and so today's experience was meditating, researching, thinking through, trying to figure out what this means. And finally, I came up to one commentary by my teacher that I finally, today, was just like opened up to me. I was like, wow. At first I read it and said, what is he talking about this for? And then all of a sudden, I could see how it connected to this verse. And the second one I want to share with you tonight, if there's time, is not a commentary on this, but a commentary on the topic by another monk, Ajahn Chah. And it's almost amazing. Last week it was Heidegger and Master Hua. This week it's Master Hua and Ajahn Chah, one being considered to be a Theravada forest monk and the other a Mahayana Chan monk. And yet, I hope when I share these two passages, when I'm done, you'll say, who said which one? Because it didn't seem like they were very different at all. Anyway, what I'm going to do with this line here, and I'm trying to look at the Chinese. Is it fei shi he fei bu he? Really convoluted little line there, which BTS translates, it's not combined nor is it uncombined. Maybe you get that right away? I didn't. I was going to, Alex, you want to come up and explain that line? Pass. Mm-hmm. You're not going to mark, huh? I think, and this is both from the commentary and finally my own wrestling with it, I would say it's not connected nor disconnected. Or better, it's neither identical nor separate. Combined, so it's neither identical nor separate. And by this I mean, again going to the commentary which I'll read, the Dharma and what speech and language, the ordinary, everyday, are not apart from each other. So the Dharma exists in the everyday, ordinary, phenomenological world we live in. It's not separate from that, nor is it identical to that. This is the tricky part. It is not the same as the ordinary, mundane, unawakened existence. But it's also not separate from, apart from that. And this is the tension here. So, let me finish the verse and then go to this. They have, in substance and nature, still and quiet, I would say, untouched by any marks. And by anything confined by sight and sound. Now, when I read Master Hua's commentary, I thought, why is he starting out here? Why does he take this passage, especially the combined, uncombined, Marx, not apart from Marx, and so forth? And here's his commentary, and see if this resonates with you as it did with me. He starts with, everything's a test to see what you will do. If you don't recognize before your eyes, you'll have to start anew. So this is how he starts his commentary. Then he says, the six patriarchs said, he quotes, the Buddha Dharma is right here in the world. Awakening is not apart from the world. To look for Bodhi apart from this world is like looking for a rabbit with horns. So somehow, in these two verses, one, he's saying connected, not separate, not apart, that what we call the Dharma is actually right here in front of us all the time. It's not apart from the ordinary existence. This is really existentially very powerful. And yet it's not the same as the worldly flow that we're in. So this is the tension in cultivation. What makes a difference? His first line, everything's a test to see how you will respond, how you react. If you don't recognize, then that wonderful Dharma that's right there is not seen by you. It's not picked up at all. And you'll have to start over again with your cultivation. Let me go on with this idea here then. His commentary, the Buddha Dharma is here in the world. He quotes from Hui Neng. Hui Neng said the Buddha Dharma is right within worldly dharmas. Awakening is not apart from the world. If while in the world you're not awake, then you're confused by worldly dharmas. But once you've awakened, everything is the Buddha Dharma. You don't leave the world to look for awakening. When you wake up, everything in the world, all the 10,000 things, all the myriad principles, is clearly understood. To look for Bodhi awakening apart from this world, if you go outside the mundane to search for awakening, then it's as if you were looking for a hare or a rabbit with horns. And then he sort of says aside, if you look for a rabbit with horns, you'll be looking for a long time and never find what you want. You won't find one. Then to finish his commentary, this clearly says the Buddha Dharma is in the world. Everything in the world is speaking the Dharma. There's nothing that's not speaking the Buddha Dharma. If you're able to understand something, then it's speaking Buddha Dharma. And if you don't understand, it remains worldly Dharma. So when it says the Dharma is apart from Marx, it means that it's not a separate thing away from what we are immersed in right now and call the world. It's just that we can't discern. So it's the Dharma is the Wuxiang apart from Marx means it's not upside down dream thinking. Without upside down dream thinking, the Dharma is everywhere. As he says, the Buddha Dharma is everywhere. But with upside down dream thinking, which is marking, there's no Buddha Dharma that you can find. So this is kind of interesting that Dharma is the absence of, rather than the presence of something that you can see and hear. It's the absence of the confusion that covers over. And so what we take as real world is projected dream thinking. So this is what I love about people saying, wow, you got to be in the real world. Dharma's got to relate to the real world. The Dharma is the real world. And what we take to be the real world, the upside down dream thinking, is what the passage said last week. It's a cataract. It's impaired vision. And so you can't really look for it. As with no confusion, no attachment, no cravings and desires, the seeing that remains when the impairment of confusion is gone is Dharma. And it's just seeing things as they really are. And so it's right there with things as we imagine them to be, are in a sense concealing things as they really are. But it's not like the Dharma is something apart from that you have to seek and look for. This is really subtle, but it's really important. And then Master Hua goes on, if you see affairs and understand them, you transcend the worldly. You don't leave, if you see and understand them, you see the differences. Like you don't leave, you're not on a rocket going off to another heaven or realm. If you see Jian and understand Zhi, you transcend. If you see and are confused, you fall into the mundane. But the mundane and the world transcending are right within seeing and understanding. They're not two different realms. Then he goes on, if you can understand the things that happen to you, then you'll be able to transcend the world. But if you're confused when faced with a situation and it turns you around so that you don't even know which way is north, south, east, and west, then you'll definitely fall. Everything in this world, the wholesome and the unwholesome, the good and the evil, the right and wrong, is speaking the Dharma. It all depends on whether or not you recognize it. Everybody is speaking the Dharma, but you have to be able to recognize it. If you recognize it, then the Buddha Dharma is here in the world, and awakening is not apart from the world. If you recognize it, then you are looking for, if you don't recognize it, then you're looking for awakening apart from the world. And that is like looking for a rabbit with horns. It's just that way. So today, as I read this, really started to open up this passage and this understanding for me of what's being talked about here. And if I could, in the time I have, I want to read this passage from Ajahn Chah. So Ajahn Chah was one of the monks that was responsible for renovating or renewing the Thai forest tradition, which is the wandering ascetics, doing the Dhutanga practices, really begging for, or going on alms around, simple clothes. He was coming out of the revival of that tradition by Ajahn Mun, who had preceded him. My Dharma brothers at the time, when I was cultivating, were disciples of Ajahn Chah. That was Bhikkhu Samedo, Ajahn Samedo, and Amaro, and so forth. So they were coming out of, they were disciples of Ajahn Chah. I was a disciple of Master Hua. But we intersected, we spent many times and periods of time together teaching, listening to each other, learning, and so forth. Interesting, Master Hua was born in 1918, and so was Ajahn Chah, same year. Ajahn Chah died in 92, and I believe Master Hua died in 95. So, I mean, almost identical lifetimes. But I want to read to you this passage from Ajahn, and bear with me, and maybe I'll go a little over, but it's really worth, I think, really worth listening to. It helped me a great deal. And it also helped me break through this idea of Mahayana Theravada as if these were two, I mean, talk about marking. There's another thing. If the Dharma is this way, why would you go setting up these kinds of marks on top of that? That's a spiritual confusion. So, this is from a talk Ajahn Chah gave. And interesting, the title of this collected talks is Vimutti Rasa, Taste of Freedom. That's the actual title of the collected talks. So I'm just going to read a longer section of this. He says, some of us start to practice, and even after a year or two, still don't know what's what. We're still unsure of the practice. When we're still unsure, we don't see that everything around us is purely Dharma. And so we turn to the teachings of the Ajahns. It's very interesting. We don't see that everything is speaking Dharma, so we teach the Ajahns being the masters. But actually, when we know our own mind, when there is sati, to look closely at the mind, there's wisdom. Now, sati means kind of maintaining awareness of reality. Maintaining awareness of reality. Not just awareness, but a reality as it truly is, where sense perceptions are understood to be illusions, and thus the true nature of phenomena can be seen. So sati is a particular kind of mindfulness that sees conditioned dharmas as dreams, illusions, bubble, shadows, and not as real and substantial. At all times and all places, then become occasions for us to hear the Dharma, if you maintain that sati. which I would go back to what I was talking about, Master was talking about. If you have the mindful awareness of things as they really are, then everything is speaking this Dharma. If you don't, even the Dharma doesn't register to you. Ajahn Chah goes on. We can learn Dharma from nature, from trees, for example. A tree is born due to causes, and it grows following the course of nature. Right here, the tree is teaching us Dhamma, but we don't understand this. In due course, it grows until it buds and flowers and fruit appear. All we see is the appearance of the flowers and fruit. We're unable to bring this within and contemplate it. Thus, we don't know that the tree is teaching us Dhamma. The fruit appears and we merely eat it without investigating. Sweet, sour, salty, it's the nature of the fruit. And this Dhamma, the teaching of the fruit. Following on, the leaves grow old, they wither, they die and fall from the tree. All we see is that the leaves have fallen down. We step on them, we sweep them up, that's all. We don't investigate thoroughly, so we don't know that nature is teaching us. Later on, new leaves sprout, and we merely see that without taking it further. We don't bring these things into our minds to contemplate. What is going on here? If we bring all this inward to investigate, we will see that the birth of a tree and our own birth are no different. This body of ours is born and exists dependent on conditions, on the elements of earth, water, wind, and fire. It has its food, it grows and grows. Every part of the body changes and flows according to its nature. It's no different from the tree. Hair, nails, teeth, skin, all change. And if we know the things of nature, then we will know ourselves. Buddha Dharma is in the world, in the natural phenomena. He goes on, people are born, in the end they die. And having died, they're born again. Nails, teeth, skin are constantly dying and regrowing. If we understand the practice, then we can see that the tree is no different from ourselves. If we understand the teaching of the Ajahns, then we realize that the outside and the inside are comparable. Things which have consciousness and those without consciousness do not differ. They are the same. Okay, combined, uncombined, see this, the link? And if we understand this sameness, then we see the nature of a tree, for example, we will know it's no different than our own 5 skandhas: body, feeling, memory, thinking, and consciousness. We have this understanding, then we understand Dhamma. If we don't have this understanding, we don't understand Dhamma. If we understand Dhamma, we understand the 5 skandhas, how they constantly shift and change and never stop. So, whether walking, standing, sitting, or lying down, we should have sati and watch over and look after the mind. Take this in, contemplate it, investigate, see the non-duality of these worlds, these dimensions. When we see external things, it's like seeing internals. When we see internals, it's the same as seeing externals. If we understand this, then we can hear the teaching of the Buddha. If we understand this, then we can say that Buddha nature, the one who knows, has been established. Buddha nature, he says, the one who knows has been established. It knows the external, it knows the internal. It understands all things which arise. Understanding like this, then, sitting at the foot of a tree, we hear the Buddha's teaching. Redwood Vihara. Standing, walking, sitting, lying, we hear the Buddha's teaching. Seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and thinking, we hear the Buddha's teaching. The Buddha is just the one who knows within this very mind. That, you go back to the Tathagata without marks, it's the one who knows within this very mind. It's a state of understanding and realization. It's not a being out there. It's not the Buddha nature. It's not that the Buddha nature, the one who knows, arises. The mind becomes illumined. One who knows within this very mind is Buddha. It knows the Dharma and it investigates the Dharma. It's not that the Buddha Dharma or the Buddha nature arises. It's always there. It just becomes awake. If we establish the Buddha within our mind, then we see everything, we contemplate everything as no different from ourselves, markless. Okay? I'm putting this in. That's what seeing no marks. We see various animals, trees, mountains, and vines as no different from ourselves. Self and others, mark, gone, no marking. We see poor people and rich people. They're no different. They all have the same characteristics. One who understands like this is content wherever he or she is. She or he listens to the Buddha's teachings at all times. If we don't understand this, and even if we spend our time listening to the teachings of the various ajahns, we still won't understand their meaning. This very mind, is capable of knowing the truth of nature. If the mind still has obstructions, then we say it knows through ignorance. It's a very interesting turning. It knows wrongly, it sees wrongly. That's the one who knows. He doesn't say, and then there's a one who doesn't know. He says it's the same one. If it has obstructions, then it knows through ignorance. Without obstruction, it knows through prajna. It knows wrongly and it sees wrong. Knowing wrongly and seeing wrongly, or knowing and seeing rightly, it's just a single awareness. We say wrong view and right view, but it's just one thing. Wrong view and right view arise from this one place. When there is wrong knowledge, we say that ignorance conceals the truth. When there's wrong knowledge, then there is wrong view, wrong intention, wrong action, wrong livelihood. Everything is wrong. And on the other hand, the path of right practice is born in this same place. Do not look outside. The Tathagata, all of this is within the nature. I'm interpolating here. When there is right, then wrong disappears. Finally, as he brings us up. The Buddha was awakened in the world. He contemplated the world. If he hadn't contemplated the world, if he hadn't seen the world, he couldn't have risen above it. The Buddha's awakening was simply enlightenment to this very world. The world was still there. He didn't leave the world. Gain and loss, praise and criticism, fame and disrepute, happiness and unhappiness were still there. If there weren't these things there, would be nothing to become enlightened to. What he knew was just the world, that which surrounds the hearts of people. If people follow these things, seeking praise and fame, gain and happiness, and trying to avoid their opposites, they sink under the weight of the world. Gain and loss, praise and criticism, fame and disrepute, happiness and unhappiness, this is the world. The person who is lost in the world has no path of escape. The world overwhelms him. This world follows the truth of Dhamma. So we call it worldly Dhamma. Person who lives in worldly Dharma is called a worldly being. He's surrounded by confusion. Interesting what Ajahn Chah is saying. What we call the world is our making of it. When we are in this state of mind, praise and blame and so on and so forth, that thought makes that world. It's not something that exists in and of itself except through this marking of it in that way. When that confused marking of that stops, the world doesn't go away. It becomes world transcending right within the worldly. Therefore, the Buddhists taught us to develop the path. We can divide it into morality, concentration, and wisdom. Develop them to completion. Take them to the end. This is a path of practice which destroys the quote-unquote world that we have imaginally created. Where is this world? It's just in the minds of beings infatuated with it. Wow. Where is this world? It's in the minds of beings infatuated with it. The action of clinging to praise, gain, fame, happiness, and unhappiness is called world. This is a really important line. Ichi wei shinza, everything's made from this mind alone. We're saying, what does that mean? He's actually being very explicit here. He says, the mind that's infatuated with it and the action of clinging is what is called world. Where it is there in the mind, then the world arises. When those things are there in the mind, then the world arises and the worldly being is born. The world is born because of this desire. Desire is the birthplace of all worlds. To put an end to desire is to put an end to the worldly. And yet the worldly never goes, and in a sense it's never there except through our infatuation and creating in that way. So I wanted to share this two passages tonight. I know it's quite, I went through it maybe too quickly, but I found this extremely helpful today as I was working through this Avatamsaka text to understand these passages. And I would just say, if you look at this, and I'm just going to run through the next verses here to show you and leave it there, then the rest of these verses make a lot more sense. And I'm looking at the following verses. The Buddha's body is not produced and transcends sophistry. It's not a collection of skandhas or dharmas of differentiation. You just see what Ajahn Chah was talking about. By obtaining the power of self-mastery, one is certain to see him. In other words, mastering the projection, mastering the infatuation impulse, and so forth, when you get that mastery, you're able to see the Buddha. His activity is fearless, apart from the path of words. Mind and body level and equal, not making these discriminations that Ajahn Chah was just talking about. Inside and out, all is liberated. Liberated means to be without attachments. You have no attachments, then there is freedom from, which is liberation. Again, it's freedom from. It's not a freedom you have to get. It's a freedom that comes from letting go. Master Wa says, if you able to attain liberation, then you have proper mindfulness. If you have proper mindfulness, you will attain liberation. If you don't have proper mindfulness, you'll have, quote, upside down dream thinking. Dian Diao Wang Sha. And if you attain proper mindfulness, then there are no impediments and you leave upside down dream thinking far behind. Actually, he's quoting the closing lines of the Heart Sutra. And to leave upside down dream thinking is to have proper mindfulness. In other words, upside down dream thinking ties you into a world that feels real. Without that, you're still in the world, but it's not upside down and it's not painful. It's also to have no attachments and no fetters. Return to the root, go back to the source. View the wind and light of your natural home. That is the way of true and actual self-mastery. And then he goes, the verse goes, for an attorney of kalpas, dwell in proper mindfulness. He dwells forever unattached, unfettered. And finally, to clarify, which I think these verses follow from the commentaries we just read, he is one who has a pure and bright mind, not infatuated, not obscured, not cloudy. And all he does is without defiling attachments. Really interesting. Again, defiling attachments essentially is outflows, ashrava, vana. There's no place this wisdom eye does not see. And then, interestingly, from this wisdom comes compassion, a vast and great benefit to living beings. So you have here what seemingly started as very difficult to understand verses and what it was getting at, but is actually talking about something very real and accessible, and yet very subtle in how we move or don't move to create or to stay uninhibited, unhindered, I should say, in this matrix. And it's very interesting, and both Ajahn Chah and Master Wa really bring it down to that existential, direct, and demystify, I think, the text here. So I'll close there. I'm sorry I went over a little, but I was very excited when I found this today, and it really helped me get some purchase on this passage. So, someone else? Better move this one too. Okay, there you go.
So as Marty was talking about the Buddha and the Dharma, I was reminded of something we actually did today as a group of you could say men here at the monastery. What we've been doing was actually each of the men in the program have actually been doing their own self-study. So they've been taking their own topic and studying something. One of the men shared something that I think was quite appropriate for what Marty was sharing this evening and what the sutra text was talking about. And the question is, do we really know what it means to take refuge? We often say we take refuge with the Buddha, Dharma, and the Sangha. And I think oftentimes we see the Buddha as, sitting on the altar there, looking very majestic and awe-inspiring, good deportment. And we see the Dharma as the sutras right behind, right, all the words that we can read. And the Sangha is maybe the monastic community wearing the robes. And for sure there's that aspect to the refuges. But what he shared that I found particularly helpful, especially for myself, was you could say the timeless qualities of the three refuges. Maybe you could say the internal aspects of the three refuges that in some sense you can't really see, but we can find in our own experience. And so, as this young man was talking about it, he was studying Ajahn Pasano's talks on loving kindness, as well as Bhikkhu Bodhi's writings on the three refuges. He said that the Buddha, in this timeless quality, is actually characterized by wisdom, compassion, and purity. Being able to find those qualities in our own heart. As Marty was just talking about, this kind of clarity, this kind of caring, this kind of, the purity is this kind of ability to let go, not cling. Then he said the Dharma, this timeless quality, was a fundamental truth, things as they are. And he talked about Sangha, and he didn't actually say what it was, so I had to ask, because I was quite curious. And he says, it's the practice. Practicing directly, practicing insightfully. And as I was listening to him, I found it very practical. Because as he was talking, I just kind of reflect on my own experience. Right here, right now, we can find those qualities in our experience. That quality of clarity, that quality of care, that quality where we don't have to hold on to be safe. We actually find that true safety comes from letting go. And that the refuge in our experience isn't some ideal, how I think things are supposed to be, the ability to accept things as they are, the Dharma. And finally, we take refuge in the practice, moment to moment, applying our energy in a way that leads us to liberation. And so maybe I'm just going to share a story that happened today, because I actually used it immediately afterwards in the day. And so at one point I was feeling somehow things weren't going as efficiently as I hoped. We were doing stuff and I was like, gosh, things seemed to be very dragging. And I got a little bit afflicted and irritated in my own mind and my heart. And we're kind of like, ah. And I come to evening ceremony and we were starting the chanting. And this participant's sharing came to heart, because during the ceremony, we have the Buddha in front of us, we're reciting the sutras and the praises, and clearly we're here as a community in practice. So, why am I taking refuge in my ideal of efficiency, about productivity? How is that beneficial at all? Is that really the refuge place? Maybe I grew up with that place as my refuge of trying to be efficient and productive, but that's, in fact, actually taking refuge in there and getting irritated is not very productive at all. I'm just wasting a lot of energy being irritated. So maybe let's let that go. Right? And I found actually, why not just kind of rest in this caring, clear heart and just apply myself in that place, moment to moment, accepting things as they are. And of course, it didn't kind of just disappear immediately, but I could see the state for what it was rather than just being in the state and being just pulled along by it. I say, okay, what I'm taking refuge in is just observing this state for what it is, holding with this kind of care, applying the practice. And to me that's interesting, because that's, you could say, when we say we're taking refuge, how we actually can apply it moment to moment. It's always there, accessible to us. That's what I was really struck by when I was hearing it this morning. It's always accessible to us. The refuge are always accessible, right here, no matter how afflicted we are. We can care about ourselves. We can see it clearly. And we can apply ourselves, however difficult, we can apply ourselves little bit by little bit. And it's from grounding ourselves there that we can actually taste the liberation that Marty was sharing tonight about from Ajahn Chah and Master Hua. And I have to say, the taste of liberation is way better than the taste of affliction. So, maybe that much for this evening.
Vimutti klesha.
Vimutti, yeah. Or klesha rasa.
Klesha.
Klesha rasa. The taste of affliction is pretty bitter.
No announcements?
We have the 4 Fearless Heart Retreat starting tomorrow evening. For those who wish to join, you can still join. You can find the link at the Berkeley Monastery website. Click it and you'll find a link to a service-based website on online retreats called Pods. And it's basically 1 week of exploring the hearts of kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity. Definitely recommended if you have the time. We also have the Great Compassion Mantra, Dedication of Merit, this Sunday at 6:30 in the morning. And otherwise, I think we just have our regular schedule. So welcome to join in. Happy to have you. Okay. Let's dedicate merit. May every living being, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, may our minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light dispel the darkness of our endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise. Bow in respect to the 3 jewels.